How was it working as a choreographer on So You Think You Can Dance?
The stress never changes. I think the show is built around a culture or an atmosphere of tension.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a contestant, you're like, oh, you're assumed. Of course, they're going to do this because they want to pull emotions from you.
Yes.
But I realized that transcends to everyone, even behind the camera. So even people working on crew and everything, that tension, they let it permeate everything. Everyone's nervous and everyone feels like if they don't prove themselves, that there is some terrible thing that will happen to you.
Hey, the Steezy podcast is brought to you by us, Steezy Studio, the #1 dance app on the App Store and Google Play Store with over 1 million downloads. We provide curated online dance classes taught by the world's best instructors. Why did we create Steezy? To help you reach your dance goals one step at a time. Whether that goal is to perform with the biggest and best musical artists in the world or just be the life of the party at your cousin's wedding. I'm your host, Clay Boontanakit. Let's get to it. Phillip Chbeeb, aka Pacman, leader of I Am Me dance crew, featured on billions of seasons of So You Think You Can Dance, Street Dance China, choreographer Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, Neo, Wayne Brady, Justin Bieber, and possibly most important, Steezy Studio.
Yeah, absolutely the most important. Clay. Thank you for bringing that up. I was gonna make sure you didn't forget it.
Hi, Phillip.
How's it going, Clay? You good?
I'm good. I'm happy. I got my chai here.
Nice.
Living the life.
Yeah.
You got your matcha.
I got my matcha. I'm also living the life.
Love that. What'd you do today?
What did I do today? I woke up, so that was great. And then I think this was the first day in a long time where I didn't have to rush off to work in the morning.
Love that.
So yeah, this was actually one of the relaxing days where I get to come at you without like crazy anxiety.
Yes, absolutely. Did you have breakfast today?
I did. I had a little breakfast burrito. It was
breakfast
great.
burrito. What's your Mount Rushmore of breakfast foods?
Holy, let's see.
It's like a top 4.
It's gonna end up being basic. I know it is because there's certain things. Okay, there's a particular. This is so Cali of me too, but there's a particular type of avocado toast.
I love avocado toast.
Yeah.
I love it.
But there's a place near me that essentially puts like a bean spread underneath.
Ooh.
And then puts the avocado, like mashed avocado, and then a little bit of cotija cheese and like cilantro and these like pickled onions. It's a really specific avocado toast, but it is quite good.
Pickled onions are the goated topping for avocado toast.
Yeah.
Bean spread. Do you like it when it's chunky? Or do you like the mash of avocado?
I like it mashed.
You like
it
it
mashed?
Yeah.
Well, because sometimes they'll mix it in with like a little bit of salt and like they'll put a couple things in the mash, and that kind of like makes the flavor pop a little bit. I didn't know I had this many opinions about avocado toast until we just brought it up, but I guess I do.
That's why we're here today
to find out how I feel about avocado toast. We can go home now. Yeah. Thanks. This is a great pilot. This is gonna work.
It's gonna be fire. Yeah, yeah. Avocado toast. That's a good top breakfast food. Let's get into some fun little questions.
Okay.
First thing.
All right.
Is Pacman.
Yes. The name.
Your name. Did you like the game?
I did like the game. I wonder. It was weird. I think I had the fortunate experience of having a couple friends around me when I was making the name, because some of the other.
You made the name.
We were going through a bunch of names because I had just joined this very small crew of poppers. And we were talking about like I had to enter battles and I was nervous about it and I wanted to pick a name, and they were basically telling me no to all the names I suggested.
Dang.
But for good reason. They were all like
Let me hear a reject. I need to hear a reject.
Like it was anything I think it was like Pioneer, or like it was all like self-indulgent. Like I thought it was cool at 16. They were the worst. Like they wouldn't have lasted at all, and no one would want to see that person battle.
Yeah.
But I think because I was really into tutting and I think there was like some also the fact that Pacman was kind of fast and I had a huge problem rushing.
Oh.
So like they always thought it would be like, because it was always like I was chasing. And they thought so. It was almost like a diss to myself in a way, because it was like I was
calling
like,
out
what my weakness was. But because we were all cool, they were like, I think that name will stick better than some trying to make yourself look cool. So when they gave me that name, I was like, okay, cool, I'll do that. So then honestly, it just became a thing that stuck for a while, and it was not direct. But also the main reason that made it easy was that my initials are PAC.
What's A?
Assad. So it's actually my dad's first name is my middle name. So yeah, so it's Phillip Chbeeb.
Nice.
And that just made it an easy answer. It was like PSE, Pac, so Pacman.
You should have been Pac Child, and then when you grew up,
yeah, slowly.
you could have been, could have evolved.
Just a Pac senior citizen.
Pac senior. That's the goal. You know, we all want to make it to that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, we did a little bit of research and stuff, which I think is always...
I'm scared, yeah.
It's always interesting. It's okay, nothing too crazy. But, so, did you start dancing when you were around, like, was it 15-ish?
Yeah, I was around 15. Yes.
What I don't know is, did you start a dance studio at age 16?
Yeah, it was a weird thing because there wasn't a lot of studios actually in Houston at the time. There was a couple, but almost all the studios that are out there now that are killing it weren't around at the time. So it was one particular studio, and I was around 15. I had just I was supposed to be on the baseball team in high school. I did a bunch of sports previous to this, and I think I got a line drive to the face, and I ended up going to the hospital.
Oh my gosh!
It became a whole thing during the tryouts for baseball. So I basically had months off because I had to let that heal, and I couldn't really join the baseball team. So a couple friends of mine were like, "Why don't you just come and try dance?" Which was such
obviously.
And I think it was mostly because during the school dances, I loved like doing weird like. I think when Kazaa and Napster were still popular, like the only videos you could download of dance was like people at raves, doing like some digits or some waving, and maybe like a crip walk video or something. And I had no context what I was actually copying. Yeah. So like I was basically just waving my fingers and crip walking at school dances, and that was like my only way to try to impress women. It wasn't super effective, but people saw that and they were like, well, why don't you just come to a dance class since you like doing whatever that is. And then once I went there, I realized that there was a freedom to dance that I think all the sports that I was enjoying didn't have. And I think it was just the ability to explore and find a game where if I was myself, that was valuable and can be like built and developed. Where like in any other sport, you're really trying to fit into a mold, and you're trying to develop yourself to be as good as a version of that mold as possible. You know, if you have to run a certain speed, you have to jump a certain speed. Like there's less of like a personal expression in a lot of sports. But dance, immediately I was like, oh wow, I can kind of just be my weird little self and develop that, you know, apart from competition, and I can compete with that. It was just a weird, to me, like the whole world, and I think a lot of people don't realize this if you're already in the dance world, but it's a very rare thing, especially the battle world, is that you can develop yourself independently and then compete with that, even if it doesn't have that much similarity to anyone else.
I think it also depends on the battles you go to, right?
Yeah.
Because some people really judge based off how you are compared to the mold that they understand.
And actually, you brought up a good point, because that was actually and I don't want to go too far ahead of us.
You do whatever you need to do.
But what ended up happening was, in Houston, it was such a raw, at least at the time I was there, it was such a raw community for freestylers that all the people of my age that were freestyling were completely different entities, and none of the techniques we used were the same. And it wasn't until I went to the West Coast that I saw things organized and structured around styles.
Was it because there was just a disconnect to the original cultures in Houston?
Exactly.
Okay.
I think there was people who got different pieces of information. It was very much like a back room, like, I figured this weird thing out with my body, check it out. And everyone kind of went independently in these different strains. So when you saw like my generation battling, literally no one danced the same. But we were all like inspired from the same original styles. Like it was still popping, that was the original, but we just didn't know enough about it to be bound by it. So it ended up being, it was a really good, I think, place, like a cauldron for me to find myself. And then, you know, obviously, when I came to the West Coast, I realized the West Coast was going through a completely different part of their journey, because it's already been developed. And if anything, they were trying to structure it more and more so it could be more legitimized in the industry, because they were so tired of people in classical ballet and contemporary saying that their style was illegitimate. So they structured heavily to fortify themselves against that sort of thing. And it was amazing, but it was so confusing for me coming from a place where like popping battles were weirdly anything goes in Houston. And then when you come to to the West Side popping battles, it was like, well, no, if you're not doing certain foundational things, you're not actually popping.
Well, I'm not winning battles out here, guys.
Well, that's why I never won them. But the cool thing, I respected both sides because I learned something from both. But when I was starting to kind of like round out the that time period, it really was that freedom to kind of be whatever, even if it didn't look like anybody else.
Yeah.
And that really allowed me some time, because I think a lot of kids need that time to figure out who the hell they are.
Yeah.
And I think dance is one of those strange mediums where you can go through that process safely. And especially street dance is a place where most people will accept you for doing it.
Yeah.
And that really, there isn't a lot of places left where kids can do that without getting criticized or shamed for just trying.
That's one of the most surprising things when I got into dancing, because I got in like, in terms of age, I got in around 13 freshman year of high school, and I think I was most surprised by how kind people were, especially because you see it, and especially you see battle culture, and you're like, whoa,
it looks aggressive.
This is really aggressive. And I remember like walking into that like room, and they're like, oh, hey, how's it going? You know, like, oh, you're Max's brother, right? And like in high school, I was like, oh, everyone's so nice. Everyone's cheering. But you play the character during the battle. And I think that was something I didn't understand until I was in it.
Yeah, even that, I remember bringing my dad, who, moved from Lebanon. He knew nothing of this culture at all. And it was so interesting because we'd go to these like underground bars, and they look like seedy places.
In Lebanon or
in Houston. And he would come with me because he just wanted to chaperone, because I was still pretty young at the time. So he would come, and even he was astonished at just like how welcoming all the personalities were, even though you were in a place where most people would assume that this was kind of like an underhanded, shady place.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was, regardless, there was probably things on the periphery that were dangerous, but like the actual core of the community, and maybe that's just what dance provides people, really, is there's the energy's put there, so it doesn't have to be doesn't have to fester and come out in other ways. So that was the beauty of being a part of that community. It was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started dancing at age 15 because, like, what did you run into? Like, what started it originally? Yeah,
so originally, like I said, I downloaded a bunch of videos, and I was just into the movement of it. I was experimenting on my own, but I didn't realize there was a community. I didn't know there was a dance world to even be into. And a friend of mine just invited me to take a dance class, and it was
class.
It was interesting because it was like a hip hop choreography class.
Okay.
I took it. I was terrible.
Was it hip hop?
It was not hip hop.
But it was like
studio.
Studio. Okay, got
it. But interestingly enough, I was actually pretty bad at it. But I think they saw that I really enjoyed just moving. So they invited me to this kind of youth group that met once a week, and they were like, "Hey, just come and you can be part of this team." And that team performs in different places around Houston or whatever.
Well, that's cool.
And the interesting thing is, during that, I actually met this small group of outcasts that were like this popping team, and that was with Moon, Di Moon Zhang, Sifu. These are all like people that I trained with when I was a lot younger.
Yeah.
And yeah, they knew nothing about me, but I realized, I was like, oh wait, those might be the guys that I want to be around. Mostly because it felt like they didn't fit in with, like, because they didn't technically do the choreography with the studio group, but they were brought to all the performances to do their own thing. And I was like, interesting. And that felt like the most freedom you could possibly have. And I think that was the first decision I had to make between, following the choreography route or just figuring out how to express myself as a soloist. And I was immediately drawn to this idea of just being my own weird character.
Yeah.
And that also just gave me the freedom to make up movement however I wanted.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And does that trickle into like starting your studio? What was the name of your studio?
Marvelous Motion. And I credit Moon for most of the work on this, because he was the older person going through it. But essentially there was all three of us put in effort to try to make it happen. I think the main impetus for it was the studio we had worked at really wasn't conducive to street dance or to like the actual fundamentals of the style. And it's funny because even at the time we didn't even fully realize how far away we were from the fundamentals of the style.
I know that feeling.
Because actually a good example of that is that one of the first things, their original name before I joined was Boogaloo Soldiers.
Oh.
And none of us did Boogaloo.
Boogaloo, yeah.
And I think there's something really funny about that now looking back in retrospect. But anyway, so we ended up making Marvelous Motion the studio. It ended up being kind of a place where we could kind of just invite people that predominantly taught street styles, but also it allowed us to actually practice teaching. And
That's underrated. Practicing teaching.
Oh, and I feel bad for people who had to be part of my practice.
Yep, same.
Because I remember the first class, and I think I thought it was going to be so much easier. Because in your head, you're like, well, you just show the moves, and then they do them after.
Yeah.
And that is not what teaching is at all. But it was an opportunity for all of us to figure out how to teach. And yeah, so that's what we used it as. I ended up going to college eventually, so the studio remained for a couple years after I had left, and Moon was running that. And then, but it always was like a pivotal couple years where I learned a lot of the social skills necessary to move into the dance community after. So it was interesting.
Was college a path that you were always headed towards?
Yeah, I've always had this rule in my life where I never let one thing be 100% of my life.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that, and maybe we can get back to that later. But essentially the reason is I feel like when you allow one thing to dominate 100% of your focus, you get tunnel vision, and you allow it to over-dominate your validation of yourself. So, if one thing goes wrong in that one thing that you put 100, like all your eggs in that basket,
it's your identity.
You are worthless immediately.
Yeah.
So I've always found it that it's, and the world's a big place, and it's fun to explore on just on a simple level, but on a deeper level, it's always been, I want to make sure I have a place to go to redefine myself if one thing is collapsing, and always something is collapsing at some point in your life. So to have a place that you've already nourished, so you're not just going cold turkey to something else whenever this thing falls apart. I've always kind of created natural transitional momentum, and for me, I loved science. I love physics, and that was something I really found fascinating. So it was natural for me to want to go to college for those things. But I always had dance as like this other thing I was nurturing. So at that point in my life, I think it was physics and engineering and all that was my focus. And then just in case that crumbled at any point for any reason, I had been nurturing this dance love that like just stayed with me throughout that whole thing.
I think I'm quite interested in these two journeys because you're not really speaking about them as if one was a backup necessarily.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what I'm interested in, like, because I think a lot of people moving into wanting to do something with dance. Most people don't think I can be professional at dance because no one really knows where the money is in there, and parents don't support that, right? But for you had a love for this, or you have a love for physics, and you also have a love for dance. How do you not treat it as a backup?
I think ultimately, if we didn't put labels on things, we love one conglomerate of things naturally. Maybe it's like some people call it like our mandala or our dharma or whatever, but it's like you are being hurled in a certain direction as a living being. And that direction, we separate it into a bunch of names. So yes, I think I like physics or I like dance. In reality, those are just names to separate apart the one thing that I love. So I see them as feeding the journey, the momentum of where I'm naturally going. So if I love physics, it would be a disservice for me to ignore it completely. And if I love dance, it would be a disservice to ignore it completely, or to even treat them as one that ranked higher than the other. Now, obviously, we have no choice but to prioritize because we live a finite life with finite time and resources. But when I do them, I treat them as if they're the most important thing that I could be doing. And then the nice thing is whatever I do in that thing, it really does feed the next part of my journey. And I don't know if that answers your question completely, but I think that's essentially how I treat, and as we go into other things, I treat everything in my life as serving that singular thing that I love. And those are all fragments of it that come together to form the story or the line that is whatever your weird ass life is going to create. So yeah, that's why it's never been really hard for me to be like, no, dance isn't a backup, physics wasn't a backup, whatever I'm doing now is not a backup. They're just things that I'm interested in and I don't want to abandon, because I think I'll have to abandon, like everything will suffer if I abandon that thing.
That's such an interesting perspective, that I think really helps with prioritization of time and resources, because I think a lot of people have that don't put all your eggs in one basket mindset, or maybe some people are the exact opposite. If you're not putting it all in, what are you even doing? But the reality of it is these are categorized and separated so that we can understand them and we can prioritize them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your identity needs to be tied to these separate things. And if you need to prioritize something else, you're throwing something else away. Like, that doesn't need to be true.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think it's sometimes the eggs in the basket thing is a good metaphor, because I think it's the quality of the eggs, not necessarily like how many. Because I think if you do everything with the assumption that it is extremely important, not that it's the backup, what you'll get out of it is going to be valuable. It's the energy ultimately that you do the things with. And I found that if you convince yourself that certain things are more important than other things, the things that you've established are less important, you will get less out of, simply because of the way that you approach them. So I try, and I don't think I do this successfully all the time, but I do try to make it seem to myself that everything I'm doing is equally important. Like I said, that's not the easiest thing to do, because there's certain things in certain moments you're like, I hate that I'm here right now. This is not one of them. I'm very happy to be here. There you go. But I think it's just important for people to, like, try not to belittle the little things they have to do all day, because each one of those can be extremely valuable.
Those all propel you towards that
same goal.
Yeah, love that. So you went to college for, was it engineering physics?
Yeah, the title was physics engineering. And yeah, I went to school for it. It was great. I loved it.
Yeah.
The price of the school is just way too expensive. I couldn't really afford it.
Did you complete it all in one run?
No, I didn't even complete it. Actually, what ended up happening is it was actually a tough time initially, because me and my family, we didn't have a ton of money, and we really couldn't afford the school. Like, the school was great and I had a great time, and my parents even like sold a plot of land that they had, and my dad sold a plot of land that he had in Lebanon to pay for one of the years. And it started to get to a point where, like, we were kind of just scraping the bottom of the barrel money wise to try to make this thing work. And it's kind of like that thing, as you see something, that what I was saying, as it disintegrates, you have this other thing you've been nurturing. So I knew that dance is something I had been nurturing even in college, and I thought maybe that's going to be my way of helping my parents, because they really were putting the last that they had into trying to make it work.
Wow.
But I was seeing after the second year, I was like, this isn't sustainable, and then all of us are going to be in a ton of debt by the end.
Yeah.
And I don't see like an easy way out unless I can establish my own, revenue stream.
Wow.
So I just decided, I was like, all right, I need to figure out how to make this dance thing work. And that's actually how So You Think You Can Dance ended up coming into the picture, because it was right around the time that there really wasn't anything more obvious for a dancer to succeed at the time than getting on that show.
True.
That show it had a weird life to it, where it allowed all dancers to see themselves as in pursuit of an actual career rather than in a hobby that they'll keep for the rest of their life.
I mean, really the only direction was like, you teach at a small studio.
Exactly.
And get paid barely anything.
That was essentially, and even that, I think, coming from Houston, I mean, it was such a, because we even built a studio because there wasn't any. So the class teaching structure, it didn't feel sustainable either. It was kind of random. Later, I realized, after I got on So You Think, and I realized that internationally there was a huge teaching scene. But like, the world was small for me in college. So for me, the only thing was like, okay, you either make it on So You Think You Can Dance, or you're gonna have to drop out of college and have nothing. So I was like, okay, well, I can try. So I had tried once when I was 18, right before I went to college, and I made it to Vegas, and like had a small moment on TV that was I think that was a turning point for me, because you just have no concept of the distance between you and someone on television. Like, you imagine it to be massive, and then I took a trip to Chicago. I stood in line in the cold. I did that. My mom was watching.
That line is crazy too. Like,
back then it was crazy.
Those like early audition days, you get there the earliest point.
Hours. I mean, you're sitting there for hours, and then Chicago was like right in the middle of the winter.
Not the
too.
Chicago winter.
Yeah, and I did that all just because I was like, all right, maybe Chicago will be a better option than New York or LA, where like the competition's crazy. So I was like, let me go to Chicago. So I flew over there with my parents. We had a trip or whatever. And the strangest thing, and I think this could be valuable for really anybody, is even on YouTube, you'll have people you look up to, right? And you'll never see them, so you'll imagine the distance between you and them is so massive it's impossible to cross yourself. So we just took a trip. I stood in line. I go on there. I do a little wiggling around, and then I come home and I see myself on TV. And there was something that triggered. There was like a switch that happened in me, and just realized that the distance is much closer than we think. And also, I think it established that pretty much anyone you see on any screen, the reality is the humanity of everyone is so parallel that it's really smoke and mirrors that makes people feel separate. There's really not that much that separates us all in experience, and other than like certain skill sets and certain like personality traits. I mean, we're all going through the same thing. Yeah. So once I understood that, I just tried every year, and then when I was in college, I think the third time I tried, I got on, which was great because I was right around the time where I needed it. I needed something that was going to establish some sort of revenue stream that was going to save me from going broke. So that's essentially it was weirdly fated, or at least it felt that way. So I auditioned actually with an ex-girlfriend of mine, Ariel, and had never. It's actually funny because I did partner work for that audition, and it was actually just for her. I wasn't even trying to audition. She just knew I had been on the show before, so she's like, well, let's just do partner work together. They already know you, and it'll be like a fun little like cameo. And for me, I already assumed I would never be on the show, but I was like, let me go and at least show something interesting or weird, and maybe the show will find it valuable. So I went on there, and they ended up passing me as well. I wasn't even really auditioning. So I was like, interesting. And as I went to Vegas, I kept going through, and then when I finally made it all the way to the end, I was completely in shock, and wildly unprepared for the show because I hadn't even had it it wasn't even in my foresight at all that would actually happen. It was a wild and confusing and weird time, but it was important. It's like one that kind of shaped a lot of who I am now.
Which season did you make it far?
Season 5 was the one that I made it to the top 20. It was like to the regular episodes. And it feels like forever now because so many things have happened since then.
Well, I mean, you were on season 3, 4, 5, 11, 13, and 14?
Yeah, 11, 13, and 14 were choreographers. Yeah, I was a choreographer on those seasons.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so that was when I was able to come back and just basically put moves on other people that are going through that stress. But it's been a long journey. That show is the perfect thing to absolutely break a person in every possible way.
It's like, it's not even like break into the industry, it's also break in yourself, like you said, really see that you can be and are able to be on the same level as all these other people.
And even I think to some degree it also it makes your weaknesses more glaring too, which I think that's I think one of the toughest things, and I think everyone, this is something that was rare during my time, but I feel like everyone understands that if you've ever posted something on social media and gotten hate for it, you are susceptible to everyone's opinion of you. And I think usually when you're attempting a competition, you're not really thinking that much about it. I mean, in battles that people might criticize you here and there, but you're generally like, well, I'll just get up and do it again. But most of the people who watch these shows, especially some of the more cruel ones, they don't really care about you. It's a story for them to either they either want to just something to throw darts at. It's just a target to hit with their like venom that they've been storing up from the life that they're not comfortable with. And I think at that age, it's the most confusing. And I think, like I said, this is such a common thing now. It's like everyone knows, or if they don't know, they're experiencing it in real time, that some people really don't think of you as a human being once you're on a screen. You're literally just a character in a movie or in a story that they can just demolish or tear apart as much as they want. So that was one of the harder parts of the show was trying to extrapolate. People are like, oh, why does this person want my family dead? It's like, that's a weird thing.
What?
Like, because people just say whatever they feel like, so they'll just say, and they don't really know what they're saying. They're just saying like, oh, this guy went home instead of this guy that I really like, so that guy must be the devil. And it's like, holy, it's just a dance competition. So I think those type of weird learning lessons, I think, are another thing that is really valuable, because you kind of start learning how to manage yourself amidst people's opinions of you.
It's funny. I'll dial it back to something less intense, which is, you know, how everyone says like you got to work a service industry job at some point so that you can like you can understand your waiter or your barista. It's kind of like, except not many people get the same chance to be like, yeah, you know, I went on TV and received hate. Like there's a lot larger step to that. However,
the funny thing is now we're all performers because of
Instagram, social media.
So if anything, I feel like that's one of the rare things where I feel like the masses have gotten a chance to join in on the fun.
Yeah.
So I actually think it is one of those rare things where everyone gets it.
You're right. The age is different now.
Mm-hmm.
Man, did you how was it working as a choreographer on So You Think You Can Dance? Any interesting stories or moments?
There's always the stress never changes. I think the show is built around, and I don't know if it actually seems like it's by design, but they create a culture or an atmosphere of tension. Mm-hmm. And you know, when you're a contestant, you're like, oh, you're assumed, of course they're going to do this because they want to pull emotions from you. Yes. But I realize that transcends to everyone, even behind the camera. So even people working on crew and everything, that tension, they let it permeate everything. Everyone's nervous and everyone feels like if they don't prove themselves that there is some terrible thing that will happen to you.
I mean, you also have to consider like choreographers, like they might not pass because your choreography is whack. Yeah. And so I think there's a huge pressure on y'all for that.
It's not just you. It's like that person's relying on you to improve their life thereafter. You know, and it's like, wow, I just wanted to think of a cool, you know, step with my feet. I wasn't really thinking about your whole life when I was doing it. So there's that stress. I mean, regardless, it's a beautiful experience. It's like any other mountain you have to climb. You know, you have a challenge placed before you. They make the time frame extremely small. You have to make a piece and you have to adjust it quickly. You have to have the director's input. I mean, it's almost like a battle of communication because you need everyone's concerns to be addressed within 2 or 3 days of rehearsal. And then you just sit in the audience and you watch it, either the train crash or you see it like sprout into this, you know, this beautiful thing.
Yeah, maybe you win an Emmy.
Yeah. Or it's forgotten forever. It's an interesting experience, but I've always really found it valuable. Like it's something that I would, no matter where I'm at in my career, I'll always come back to do that show because it's always been a good learning lesson.
Wow. So You Think You Can Dance, man. I remember watching. Was your first season the one when you were wearing that striped shirt?
Was that the first when I was 18? Yeah, that was me in Chicago.
When the world first got to see that.
when I was doing that, when I was doing the little wave.
What a time!
Yeah, what a time!
Look at you now.
I'm still here. I'm still around.
Yeah. So something I wanted to ask about was the direction you went with partner work. Now, I mean, I guess you said that you already were doing partner work with like your ex during that time, but I wanted to ask about like the power of 2 or the power of 3, the power of 4, the power of more people, because I think that it's like really easy to get locked into your own singular body being that this is how you dance. And yet I find it so interesting because you always seem to choreograph as if people are extensions of your own and you are theirs. And I'm like, when did you like land on that?
You know, it's funny. That is 100%. I think I don't want to say all, okay, but a lot of poppers that work in the conceptual framework where they're holding points in space or they're creating shapes or imagining shapes that aren't quite there and they're working around them. That style has embedded in it bodily extension. It's already in the style. And I think some people take it further than other people. You know, it depends on where you want to go with it. But I realized when I was popping, all the concepts that me and other poppers were playing with was, okay, imagine something that isn't there being incorporated with your body. So that's like one step beyond your own body. It's, okay, so now it's not just a body in space, but there's an invisible object that I'm working with.
Yeah.
And then eventually you'll see prop battles, and there'll be people who literally will take a prop and it'll make it an extension of their body. I think all I did was just seeing how many things I could add to my body to see how many different variations I could accrue. And the reason why, honestly, the only reason why 2 was, I think there's maybe like a core human reason why 2 is valuable. I think we all attach to the idea of the communion of 2 bodies. So I think the reason why the like romance typically is told with this idea of 2 is I think it's at a manageable amount of variation that the brain can handle and understand. So you see 2 bodies communicate, but I think there's no reason why it can't extend further and beyond that. But I think that for me, I felt like it took me years to figure out what to do with just my body. So it was going to take me years to figure out what to do with 2, and then years again to do 3, because it becomes exponential what those bodies can do when you start adding on.
Yeah.
So I think all I was doing is just following the natural progression of what I was doing when I was 16. I think it was just constantly trying to seek out that next way to expand. So that's probably what that power of numbers looks like. It was just trying to figure out how people can come together and act. And I think there was a story there somewhere too, because I think there was the idea that people were at the time consistently trying to be independently valuable and distant from each other. And I thought there was something really valuable artistically about telling people the story of you can be different and still work together, because it was either like side by side choreo, 2 people doing the same exact thing right next to each other, and they're super clean, right, perfectly in unison, or it was 2 people doing completely different things and it was in discord. And I was like, I think there's a place where 2 people do completely different things and it is unified and it is synchronous. And I thought there was a story there about, you know, even cohabitating, this idea, like when you're living with like I live with Mackenzie, for instance. It's like, do I have to make her me for us to live in harmony? Or do I have to live so separate from her that we can be our own person? And I realized it was neither. We can be our own people, and those things can gel and jive in a way that serves the totality of our life together. And I think that's ultimately what that style, to me at least, represents. It's the idea of being yourself within the communion of other people, if that makes sense. Yeah,
like, well, as your work, we can use your relationship of living and dance with Mackenzie as an example. Like, in order to have I'm not trying to preach at anybody, but I believe to have a successful relationship with friendships or romantically as well, like, we have to set boundaries and we have to show where the doors are for people to enter as well. And so that makes me really curious about the choreography process, because in your 6 Choreographers 1 Song episode of, you know, our YouTube channel, you were talking about how a lot of the process isn't that fun. It's kind of grueling, and yet this means it's even crazier because you're going through this not so fun, sure, rewarding process with a person you're spending so much time with. And I feel like, wow, there's a whole level of friction that no one even sees, and no matter how much you're just telling us about it, I'm like, I can't even imagine. How do you work like that?
It's and maybe as an artist, you tend to see everything as through the lens of your art, so that's why everything feels the same. So this might be just me jumping to conclusions, but the art and that approach is the same way I approach my relationship, which is exactly what you said. You define boundaries and you define the open spaces where you can let people in. And really all you're doing is you're explaining to the other person, this is the shape that I currently am in. Can you find a place to be here with me? Like, if this is like the archways and the structures of my personality right now, is there a way that you can fit in with me? And then where do we find contact? Like, where are your structures hitting my structures in an unhealthy way? We talk about it, we make sort of compromises, and then we slowly fit together. And that isn't a comfortable experience. And I think it's never going to be. I mean, the less ego you have attached to it, the easier it is, right? The less you feel like you're identified with your structure, the easier it is to kind of morph and bend around the other person and be like, oh, okay, I can adjust. But I think the best part about it is, it's kind of that thing you briefly said about being rewarding, is once the friction disappears because you guys have made yourself moldable, it becomes the most fluid and beautiful and painless experience that you'll ever have. And it's kind of that idea where you choose a little bit of suffering at first, so that the longevity of your experience is smooth and honestly enjoyable, and you have actually the capacity to look at that person and appreciate them instead of constantly worrying about which part of them is going to cause conflict next. So I think it is like, it doesn't feel like it's ever not worth it, basically. And I think I am mixing dance, but it's the same thing, because like obviously all my style is about threading and moving through each other and past each other and lifting and carrying weight. And there is no difference to me between that and what I do with Mackenzie as a relationship. Just one is with constant communication, body language and words, and the other is just with physical movement. But the same basic structure is exactly what you said.
That makes so much sense to me, and I really relate to the comparison of dance as a relationship to human relationships. There's that one phrase, that term that so many people have said that I actually firmly disagree with. It's dance is my escape. Now, I believe it can be, but I think a lot of people say it as if that's necessarily a healthy thing to do. And for me, I very much disagree with that, because I believe when I dance, I am still my full self in dance, right? And if I am entering dance with my full self, and I come with my depression, I come with my relational issues, I am that when I'm dancing, and that needs to be okay.
Yeah.
And I can't be running away from those things, because I'm not also just dancing with myself. I'm dancing with people I love, with friends of mine, with people that I spend so much of my day with, and they're going to be affected by that too.
Yeah.
And I think that it's hard for a lot of people to understand, especially because they enter dance from various ranges of reasons. For I have a hard family life, to like trying to get ladies, you know?
Yeah.
But I think that no matter what your entrance is, I think it's always valid. But just know you're still always your whole self in there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hard to draw those sort of boundaries and also where to open those doors when you're just relating to dance itself and not a person.
Yeah. I mean, even by yourself, I think you brought up a good point. I think, and this is different for everyone. I think that's why you brought it up that way. It's a medium of confrontation, in my opinion, far more than escape. Because I think there's certain things that we refuse to confront in the normal ways because of, social guidelines. You can't just, if you're depressed, you can't just let it out at work, right? You have to find a place, right? But to me, dance is the place where you put it directly in front of you. Maybe you film it, or you put it in the mirror, and you look at it, and you examine it, and you allow it to change you in a place that's safe. And to me, that's the opposite of escaping. It's like the only place where you can look at it for what it is, because nowhere else is allowing you to. So I think everything that you said is absolutely accurate. I think we are our whole selves when we're dancing. We're actually the parts of ourselves that we don't even consciously know yet.
Yeah.
And that's the fun part about it, is like you're finding things out about yourself. You're finding out your own boundaries to things. You're finding out your own limits, or maybe the things that are beyond the limits you thought you had. So I agree in disagreeing with the escapism approach. I don't think there's anything wrong with I just think it's misworded.
There is asylum.
I think I know what they mean by it. But technically, the escape is confronting yourself. You're escaping from being somebody else.
Yeah.
That's the escape. It's the escape to yourself. If that makes sense.
I think that's a great way to put it. Which also just makes me think about I guess it's sort of around the realm, but talking about unique individual style. Because if we're consistently confronting who we actually are, that allows us to become more of who we are.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people struggle with the concept of, they simply ask, how do I find my own style in dance? That's the century old question. Not really century old. I don't know how many people in street dance maybe, but how do you find your own style? That's such an interesting field. And
I think that question has probably been posed to me more than a lot of other questions. So I have more answers for that, but I think more recently, I think it's been, it's kind of the same thing I've said before. I think it's a lot of people look into the style itself to find themselves, and they look around at other dancers, and they're trying to see like, which one of these games could I play that looks the most like me? Instead of realizing, and this is something I got lucky with, like I said, with the community I jumped into, making your own game. And I think making your own game is terrifying, because you're like, well, what if no one else wants to play that game? What if you do something physically and everyone's like, looks ugly to me?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the most terrifying thing, is like you started a new game, a new thing, and nobody wants to play the game. But I think ultimately you will never achieve the highest level of whatever you're trying to pursue in dance or whatever until you've made it about who you are. And I think to make that more clear, a lot of times I'll tell my students to go and experience life outside of dance and allow that to educate their dancing. And it seems pretty straightforward, but it's like, go, fall in love, have your heart broken, spend some time with, your grandparents, like find out about what their life was like, experience like a rich life outside of dance. And that is all the things that educate your dancing. So if you really want to make something unique or specific to you, you need enough number of experiences that are specific to you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are running around going to every cookie cutter experience trying to get the knowledge. Well, I'm like, well, you're going to end up looking like everyone else who did the same things.
Yeah.
And I forgot who told me this once, but if you want to be like an individual in a group of, tons of people that are doing the same thing, you can't be doing the same thing that everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And that is just the scary part of it, and the beautiful part of it is you have to do something alone for a while. And eventually people catch on, because once you get really good at being you, people will give you concessions for being weird.
Yes.
I think ultimately I went through it. I started battling. I realized I was like, this isn't the exact game for me. It's amazing that it exists, and it gave me a chance to start to find myself. But then when I came to California, I was like, this isn't where I shine. I love it. I love the community, but this isn't where I'm supposed to be. And then I went on YouTube. I got tons of hate for just making weird, goofy dances that weren't good.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I let myself just fester for 2 or 3 years, just being bad at something I really love doing. And eventually people started to come around and check out what I was doing there. Well, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And eventually they accepted me. And it's funny because that is the process. And as long as you're willing to roll solo doing the thing you love for long enough, people will always come around, because they can smell authenticity. I think a lot of times, and I think it's really smart of communities to do this, if someone just passively is like, I want to do something different, it makes sense that they'll ignore you at first. And also makes sense that they'll almost criticize you, because they're testing your resistance to that. Because how many people, and I think we've all met those people who are like, I want to be original and different, and then they put effort into that for about a week and then they quit.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. The community is not going to like completely turn their whole value system over for you.
Yeah.
Just because you had a whim one week and suddenly you want the whole community to change for you.
Yeah.
It's like they need to see you putting the effort in and speaking your truth for long enough to know that it's real.
Yeah.
And that's honestly the biggest advice I'd give to anyone who wants to originate something. It's like, well, go live a life that you feel is different, and then take the time by yourself without any sort of supporters to develop it. And then once you do, there will be people who come to you and like, I love what you do.
Yeah. That is, it's so much easier said than done, right?
Oh, I mean, it's hard. Yeah.
We are emotional beings. We get bombarded, but it sort of goes back to what you were saying in the very beginning, which is like how each of these endeavors in life they're not separate. They're all propelling us towards the same direction. Persistence in our whole self, persistence with our whole self in dance is the most rewarding and terrifying experience, because dance is so vulnerable. Like if we just strip it of everything, it's like it's my body. You're looking at me, every little like side pimple and stuff that you notice in the morning, that's on display for the world.
Yep.
And that, especially in this age with social media, sharing all these things. And so yeah, I do think it's a terrifying experience, but the more we can come to the understanding that if we persist with our whole self in dance, we will grow from it, and we will love it. And even if other people don't love it, the fact that you feel safe in your body through that is such a wonderful experience.
Oh yeah.
I want more people to experience that.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's tons of people walking around now that are completely vertical for like 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
And I do think of dance as one of many ways in which we've constricted ourselves from any sort of individual expression. And I don't only mean it. I mean, you can take any 9-to-5 worker who works in an office and they're living life. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that life. It's fantastic, and whatever they're doing is going to be valuable to their company. But physically, what they've done to their body is by like completely remaining either vertical and then not allowing themselves to express. Even like there was mannerisms that you'd think would be natural, but even those are like subdued because like, oh, that's not what we do in this setting. You know, like, so everything animalistically that comes natural to us to define ourselves by the way we sit in a chair or by the way we move or walk, everything has been kind of conformed to some idealistic image. And I do think that does something to you psychologically.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like dance is, at least in my opinion, is one of the easiest. I think, you know, singing does that. I think painting, a lot of the arts do a similar thing. It's like a place to reach and stretch, to take up a different shape than just this like linear body that just wears a suit and sits in a chair, stares at things, and then goes home and does the same thing. And And I really don't mean that to demean the jobs themselves, but
Yeah.
I think the fact that we can't be ourselves in those jobs is worrisome a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Those effects of habits formed by the environment really do trickle into everything that we do in life.
Yeah.
I remember early days of Steezy. We would be having meetings, and I mean meetings with 4 people because it was 4 of us, right?
Yeah.
And I sit the way I sit, and I like get on my knees on these chairs. I like sit on the back of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just stand up and I just start stretching. And I remember I remember Connor, one of the co-founders of Steezy, he was like, can you just sit down? Can you just sit down? I was like, I don't know, like it really helps me, but he's really understanding of it. Like he just had to hear and like see what it meant. But basically every meeting I have with any person, at some point I get up and I start stretching, but I'm paying really
Close
intense attention to them. And I think there's something about the culture at the company that I love, because this is a 9 to 6, you know, and we are out here grinding as a tech company, but it's the only company where you walk in and you might not win a dance battle against every person. It's the only place where 100%. You see the employees like take a dance break, stretch, like doing full splits while talking about what to do next in the app, some bugs. You know, it's a weird place.
I love it. I mean, I really do think it sets a precedent for a lot of other people that come in here too, to feel free and comfortable. Like, I mean, I'm obviously, as a dancer, that might seem assumed, but I've never felt like I had to stiffen or change myself as I entered, and I think that's a really valuable atmosphere that not a lot of places can pull off, especially tech companies. Yeah. So
I'm glad you feel that way. It was interesting when you were talking about "So You Think You Can Dance" and how they form this sort of, I don't know, this atmosphere of tension.
Yeah.
I have talked about that a lot during, not about "So You Think You Can Dance," but about Steezy involving our series, because sometimes I look at our videos and I'm like, man, if we made videos that actually had more like tension in them, I'm sure they would do better. But I feel so uncomfortable doing it that I just can't bring myself to making video series of that. I remember like we were like 3 choreographers, 1 song. How can we like, you know, maybe make the dancers like
feel like it's a competition?
Yeah, feel a little bit more of a
100%.
competition. And I think at a certain point, I'm like, if I was asked to do 3 choreographers, 1 song, and I knew there was a direct competition, because there is always a competition. There's always
just naturally.
You're being compared to 2 other dancers, plain and simple.
Regardless.
I was like, man, I don't want to make people feel like they're battling their friends, especially in the culture that we have at Steezy, which is like dance because of whatever reason you want to dance.
Yeah.
And I think that the world has made almost every one of these arts more competitive than they naturally are. They've formed tension, and that makes for exciting television, exciting videos.
Exactly. Interesting.
I get it. I know it'll probably make these videos pop off more. I just can't bring myself to do it.
I think it's good. I think having a voice that maintains the original, I wasn't around during the very original, but like from the OGs that I've spoke to about this, the inclusivity was priority, and obviously there was a big part of the community that was based on, you know, resolving things through battles, and that is real, and it's good to address it. But I think it's cool that there is a safe haven for people to feel like, oh, okay, it's the thing that I said when I first started dancing. You guys are providing that, and I think it's good. Like the idea that
which thing?
Oh, the thing where you are open to everyone being involved and included and appreciated. And I think there has to be somewhere for that, and everyone's capitalizing off of tension.
Yes.
So it's good that everyone has a place to go, and they're like, oh, I can be safe here and not worry about, you know, whether so-or-so is better than me. I can just like work on getting better in a safe place. And then when I'm ready to climb that mountain, I can do that separate from here. So I think it's great that you guys maintain that.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's fun here. There's this really crazy big show in China called Street Dance China.
Yeah.
I have not watched full episodes of it, but obviously I have a lot of friends that are choreographing. I got asked if I wanted to be a choreographer on it, but that I would have to be there for like
a long time.
Months and months, and I got this whole thing happening.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think a lot of people, especially in America, maybe Asian people know more about it, but This is a huge show.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even know, like, my mom's friends were all like, street dance chant. They're talking about Forankurin. I was like, Franklin? My boy Franklin? Forankurin. Yeah, Forankurin. Yeah. And I just, like, it blew my mind how big this show was. And I don't know that much about it, aside from, I like that they point out, like, street styles, and they, like, they try to, like, make sure people know what's happening on screen. But I don't know. This is a general question. What was that all about?
How
was that?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that you haven't seen a full episode because each one's about 4 hours.
Oh, what?
Not every single one, but I remember even there was an 8-hour finale once. So the length of these shows are completely different, and I don't know how they manage to maintain audience's attention for that long, but they do. So the structure is wildly different.
Okay.
Than shows here in America where like we're fighting to get people to pay attention for 20 minutes. Yeah. But regardless, it's a fascinating show. I think just structurally the show, essentially, it's a mashup of what we would see at ABDC, So You Think You Can Dance. It's basically every dance show you've ever seen, and then they just mix it together. Like and even shows that aren't dance related, like The Voice. So you'll have 4 main celebrities, and there'll be celebrities typically from China, but it might be Korea and a couple other places, and it changes every year. And those celebrities have they basically have dancers audition for them and join their team, and those teams then compete. So each of the celebrities has their team, which is very much like The Voice.
Yeah.
Except for dancing, and the dancers have to go through what I think is probably the most rigorous range of tasks, because they not only have to be great soloists to get through the audition, but then they have to do group routines with groups, and they'll even sometimes be put in duos, and a lot of times they have to just pull stuff together. I mean, that's why there's such a big choreography team behind the scenes. Yeah. Because there's such high expectations and very little time for sleep. I think it's just more brutal than a lot of the shows.
Yeah.
In the States.
That's a lot for you to say, because So You Think You Can Dance, I know, is quite brutal.
And actually, So You Think You Can Dance, I think in its early years was probably equally brutal, and then eventually it started regulating it a bit more, so everyone had a little bit more time to sleep. Yeah. That's nice. But like in the early days of reality television, there was just less precautions taken for people's physical well-being. Yeah. But in China, it's still kind of at that place. Yeah. In China, it's still in that place. So people really aren't sleeping much, and they're having to perform on just a couple hours of sleep each night, if that. So it's a wild ride, but I find that the show, there's value in it, and exactly the thing that you mentioned, that street dance has never fully come alive on television in America yet. But it does there. There was real battles. Like, there's been a couple of battle shows, obviously, in America, but it's never really risen to the height of, what So You Think was, and what, ABDC, but also Dancing with the Stars, which is like continues to do well. Yeah. This show seems to hit all the marks. It has obviously the celebrity feature, which
that's huge.
Brings in a huge following, like Dancing with the Stars did. And then you have real street dance, so you get to bring specialties and show them what they're good at already. So you get constantly impressive performances. And then you have the same packages and stories. So they do the whole thing where they like if you have a sad story at home, they'll tell you the sad story.
Plug it.
Yeah. I think it's a weird and crazy, chaotic mashup of things and ideas, and it works for people.
What did you do on the show?
So I was a choreographer on the show. Okay. I was a choreographer and director for some things. So for some dance pieces, they would go off-site and they would shoot basically a concept video, kind of like what we would do for YouTube back in the day, and even now, where you have like a dance concept video, and you would shoot it for the celebrity and their team. So sometimes I would direct those films, or on the show itself, I would choreograph some of the pieces for, especially, it's kind of a supervising role, because the idea is that, okay, maybe these two dancers can handle themselves. They know how to choreograph, it's fine. But then you get some freestylers that are incredible freestylers, never choreographed in their life. Yeah. So it's like, all right, they'll throw us in there and be like, put something on them, because this, we need this to not look bad. Yeah. And that's basically what they do, and that's how they quality control the whole show. Yeah. In a way that I think America hasn't quite figured out how to do that quite well, because the whole idea is like you get freestylers that can battle, but then once you have them do shows, and they've never done choreography before, they end up kind of falling off at that point. So somehow they managed to figure it out. They bring like 10 choreographers from America, and we just handle the gaps.
Were there any dancers that you didn't know about that really surprised you?
Yi Ying. Yi Ying is one of my favorite, because I've been there for 3 or 4 seasons now.
Oh, wow.
And so, so I've worked on the show since its first season and all the way up to its most recent. And Yi Ying, I think, has won twice now. I think he came back and won a second time. It was actually him and Franklin at the end.
Oh, okay.
And obviously Franklin is amazing, but I know Franklin, so that wasn't a surprise. So when I saw Franklin, I was like, you're going to do amazing.
Yeah.
But Yi Ying was particularly one of the Chinese dancers that I was like, wow. Like, this is like a diamond in the rough. Like, this is a character that if he got out of China and like showed the world what he's capable of, I'm sure that he would be one of the the best known dancers.
We gotta bring him in here.
You should. He's fantastic. You could just put on any song and he will impress you. He just has like a weird innate ability to adapt to any music. He's amazing. Yeah, so I can't sing his praises enough. So probably him. He was one that kind of shocked me for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Street Dance China, man.
Yeah, there's some talent showing up in those.
Holy moly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Phillip, last little thing I'm curious about is your interest in film directing and perhaps what you see in terms of longevity for career/hobbies in relation to that. Because I know that you really do love directing, right?
Yeah.
You like the medium of film the most?
The most, yeah. I think film it's been a weird and like growing obsession, and I think it's getting more and more in that territory lately. Film to me has a potential that hasn't been tapped, and that sounds weird because and I think almost all art forms have that, but then it's up to the artist to see that potential, and different people see it in different places. I think I see it in film specifically with dance, and I feel like there's an elevated type of storytelling that isn't played with very often, and it's surrealist, and obviously the idea of incorporating dance into films is typically done in a musical format. So typically it's like dance break. We have this dance scene, and then let's go back to the story with the characters.
Yeah.
But I feel like there is a way to incorporate it in the same way that scoring is incorporated, in the sense that you have scoring to enhance the emotion of a scene, but the scene is still preserved. We're still watching the characters interact. But if there was a way with a little bit of, you have to put some love and care into how it's crafted, but you allow the actors to do what they do best. You allow dancers to do what they do best, and the dancing actually amplifies the story. It's not a slight derailment just for spectacle. And I think, and I say dance, but it could be any sort of movement and imagery that incorporates movement in that sort of design. And I want to find out what that is, and I think that's been my more of my mission lately is, and part of it is getting better at the craft of film itself, because even just saying that film incorporates thousands of skill sets, and
that's why your credits are miles long on films.
It's exactly, and even if you're going into it saying you're like, oh, I want to do something new with film, you have to be aware of all of that. And that process is like, okay, I don't care. It might take me 20 years, and that's fine. I'm in it for the long game. But I think ultimately, if it's not me, it'll be somebody who finds that there is a way to incorporate moving visuals. And I think it's already happening in the CGI world, but I think it also can happen with just human bodies. And the way we could tell stories where really important aspects of people's psyche and people's experiences and their interactions are amplified by dance. And it'll eventually happen regardless, but it's been a fun adventure for me to try to figure out, like, how is that going to look? And can it be done without being corny? Because then, like, that's the common trope.
Well, because dance itself, especially just how we see it in media, it is kind of what it is. It's almost a hyperbolization of an emotion or a motion itself. Totally. And that almost guarantees cheesiness. But surprisingly, like, musicals, some people can't bear musicals.
I love them regardless. They definitely they work on me, but some people absolutely can't.
But I do think that's interesting because it's worked for fight scenes, right? The choreography for fight scenes works. Camera motion choreography with the movement of people works. But what happens when they're dancing? When we're actually making it a dance? That's
it's interesting. Have you seen Suspiria? The newer one?
No.
It's a horror film, so
I can't. I get too scared.
Yeah, well, this one might do the same. But there's a particular scene in Suspiria where, and I don't know how much of this. I won't do any spoilers, but there's a particular dance scene in Suspiria, and a girl is just dancing alone, but this anonymous entity that is invisible is basically pulling on her limbs to the point that they're contorted into yeah, but it's a dance scene, and it was a perfect example to me of a dance that serves a plot point. And it actually it pushed the film forward.
Wow.
And I felt like that's more or less what we need, but it requires a cleverness because it has to be embedded in the plot. It can't be an add-on just for spectacle. And I think not lately, but like historically, that has been kind of the way dance is used. It's like, well, this is supposed to be a big celebratory scene. Let's just amp it up by like putting, some people, with jazz hands,
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it just that's kind of been the way it's been happening. So it is cool to see people get creative with the way they embed dance into film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm so... What are you going to make, man?
Who knows? I don't even know. But I'm going to keep trying. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can wrap it on up. Phillip, you got 4 8 counts-ish. Tell us a bit about what's coming up and where people can find you.
All right, let's see. I am deeply entrenched in choreography work, so that's been fun, and that's been something a little bit more consistent, and I think that's my day job, basically. And that's been fun. I'm working on a project in Vegas at the Wynn Hotel, who's has this new creation that's gonna be there for several years, which is
tight.
cool.
I'm excited for that. I didn't know.
That'll be fun. Yeah, and it's still in its early phases, so we'll see how it all turns out, but I'm excited about it. There's a couple other projects too that are more film and television oriented. So normal industry work that's been great. On the back side, or at least in the personal side, I've been immensely immersed in psychology work. And I don't know, this might be something that everyone has, or nearly everyone has been diving into recently. I don't know if it's a movement or because COVID provided people enough time to look introspectively. I don't know what exactly it is, but I think I just pulled on that thread and then I couldn't stop pulling on it. So I'm constantly devouring information on psychology, and there's part of me that feels like it resonates deeply. I've been writing this book for a very long time on just kind of my philosophy of life. Who knows if it's worth anything, but it's been really revealing for me because I've been able to establish answers to some of the questions I've been ignoring in my own life, and how to, get the most out of it and have the things I do carry the most weight and meaning so that I can really, just enjoy, things instead of just working 24/7 and realizing like, what are the most important things in life. So that has been a constant pursuit, and that's why sometimes on my Instagram, people will see me like do talking videos. A lot of times it's just conversations I end up having with Mackenzie, and an interesting point comes up, and then she's like, "Just record it." So we put the camera on, I say it, and then I move on. Yeah, sorry about that. So that's been fun, and then the film thing has been pretty consistent. So I've been trying to make little short films. The unfortunate part, and this is different than YouTube, is that with short films, if you want to submit them to festivals and things, you can't post them. So the ability to share them with the audience has been kind of revoked to kind of enter that territory and meet that community. So that's been the really only downside to that, because I really always want to share the things I do with people. But there's been that on the back end too, is just creating little films that I can slowly get better at the millions of skills necessary to be a good director. So those two things are my loves. I guess on a personal note, I don't know how personal we want to get, but Mackenzie and I are just trying to, we're hustling right now to see if we can take, because obviously we're engaged now, and we're working on planning the wedding, and inevitably you start thinking about kids and things like that, and I think our excitement for that is growing.
Wow.
And it's been something that we've been talking about for a long time. I think she even this morning, she was telling me how she had a dream that she met our kid, and she was just like completely in love, and like she was almost to the point where she like missed the kid that hasn't come yet.
Wow.
And I think it's just growing. Like the passion for being a parent is growing.
Wow.
So I think that's another thing that we're like running towards.
Yeah, your ultimate collab.
Yeah, literally our ultimate collab. Yeah. I love that. That's exactly what it'll be. So all of those things, and yeah, it's. Have you seen Everything Everywhere All at Once? That's what life feels like right now.
Yeah,
entirely like that.
Absolute mayhem, but there's plenty of grounding elements,
and just tons of beauty and joy amidst the chaos.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what life is right now for me.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
This is such a blast, man.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for tuning in. Again, this podcast was brought to you by us, Steezy Studio. Be sure to get your dance on today, too. So if you want to get some exercise in, take a Steezy sweat class. If you want to just vibe out and feel good, you definitely need to check out a good groove along. Or if you're up for the challenge, it's time to finally start one of those advanced classes you've been eyeballing. We'll see you in class. This podcast was produced and edited by Josh Jang, and the theme music for the podcast is Tempo by Neiman.